in U.S. versus Towns, the court faces a question that seems to have the policy of the rule in opposition with the actual language of the rule. So in U.S. versus Towns, the prosecution, and in this case the government, is attempting to get in purchase logs that showed that the defendant had bought certain types of drugs at a pharmacist or various pharmacies, and with if you've seen the TV show Breaking Bad, you'll remember the scene where Walt runs into Jesse outside of Walmart, and Jesse has got an entire grocery cart full of NyQuil and all these other things that they're going to use to make the drug. And Walt says, you idiot, what are you doing? I told you to buy these things at different places. Well, under this statute that Texas has, it wouldn't actually matter if you bought them in different places because they can all be traced, and with metadata, we can figure out if you go to a bunch of different places and buy a ton of NyQuil and figure out who you are, because under this statute, the folks at CVS are required to get your driver's license and enter it. In fact, that's true here in Pennsylvania. If you go to CVS and get NyQuil, they'll ask to see your driver's license, and they'll keep a record of who you are. So in U.S. versus Towns, though, the government tries to introduce these records that CVS and et cetera are required to keep about these particular cold medicines and such that the government tracks. And the defendant's argument is this. So, well, look, you've satisfied all these requirements from the statute. You've shown that that the person who entered the record, it was accurate. The person who entered it that made an accurate entry because the person took the driver's license and just took a copy of it. And then you've shown that this is in the regular course of business. You are in fact in the business of selling drugs. You do that day in and day out, and keeping this record because of the government mandate is something that you're required to do. So when in the course of selling drugs, you sell this drug, you keep a record of who bought it, and that's where it satisfies the requirement of Part C. And then you have someone either testify to or provide a certificate, who's the custodian of the records, who says that all three of those conditions were satisfied. We, of course, don't have to attest to the accuracy of any particular entry, only that this is the process and procedure by which it was all undertaken. And so the defendant's argument, though, is this. He says, look, the rationale for these rules is different than all of that. The rationale is that the business internally will have an incentive to keep its records accurate because it needs to rely on those records. Whether it's to see if a particular branch of CVS is making money, or to see if we need to order an extra 20 tubes of toothpaste for the branch. The records of the business will be well kept because they're necessary internally for the business to run properly. And so the court, so the defendant argues, that's not the case when all you're doing is complying with a statute that requires you to enter these records. This is not like when you have to turn over certain documents to the IRS that you've been keeping for your own internal purposes. There's no purpose in knowing who bought your NyQuil other than the fact that this Texas statute requires you to actually do it. And so this case really is a nice example of a conflict between the policy of the statute, or the justification for the statute, and the rules that, for 99% of the cases, that ensure that the evidence offered under this is consistent with the policy justifications for the statute. And so in this case, the court says, no, it's the rules, not the policy that led people to write the rules that determine the outcome in this case. And there's nothing in the rules themselves that says you have to internally rely on these documents. or these records, so long as you regularly keep them, so long as you're running a business and you regularly keep these records, and the people who entered those records had accurate knowledge of the records that they entered. And in this case, they certainly did, because the cashier is just simply taking the photo ID and holding it up to the scanner when someone buys NyQuil. And so the reason that they're keeping the records is just not that important. Now, you could according to the court, you actually can very well imagine the defendant's argument here. It's like, how sure will CVS be in these records? Like, so long as they're making a good faith effort to comply with the reporting statute, it's really not. There's really nothing in it for them to make sure that these are right. So long as they don't, so long as the government doesn't come or the state government doesn't come and object that they weren't doing this at all. And maybe there's some sort of audit that the state does, and they need to comply with that. So there might be some internal check, but it's not. But the external check from the state auditors is not the basis for this business records exception. We don't have the sort of internal need for accuracy that we have when we're talking about how many tubes of toothpaste or which store was more profitable. So this is a nice case in that it lays out sort of a difference between the policy justification and the rules. And of course, this is not the first case to have said, look, the rules trump any concern about the policy justification. If one of those two is going to govern here, it's actually going to be the clear application of the rule rather than why we chose to write these rules in the first place. So that's all you have to satisfy for a business record exception. You simply have to show that the people who enter these records have an accurate have a basis of knowledge, and that they're accurate when they're entered, and that or the person who enters them has knowledge of the records, and that the person who enters them believes that they are entering them properly, whether they actually are proper and correct or not. That that you're in the business of doing this sort of thing. That if you're making records of drug sales, you're selling drugs, and and as part of your business, you record things, and this is one of those recordings. That's all you need. We don't need to show that you yourself are relying upon them, even though that was the whole basis of the rationale for the rule itself.